Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're focusing on something really cutting edge but also pretty controversial. New genomic techniques, or NGTs.
Right, things like CRISPR. These tools offer incredible precision in plant breeding.
Exactly. And on paper, they look like vital solutions, for developing crops that can handle climate change, helping secure a sustainable food future.
That potential is absolutely there. But the big question is why that future seems, well, stalled, why it's still waiting in the wings.
Ah, okay. So this deep dive, drawing on the BTrust Project's Masterclass 3, isn't just about the cool science.
No, not at all. It's really about where that science meets the public. It's about perception, acceptance, and the really hard work of building legitimate governance around these very powerful tools.
Got it. So the bottleneck isn't the tech itself, it's trust, a lack of trust.
That seems to be the core issue. Looking globally, biotechnology often struggles. Public acceptance can be low.
Which makes investors nervous, I imagine.
Definitely. It translates pretty directly into investor reluctance. And crucially, it means there's less political drive to tackle, restrictive regulations.
Right.
The BTrust Project really highlights this. They point to what they call social uncertainty. It's this mix of distrust, maybe misinformation, and often a lack of genuinely inclusive dialogue right from the get-go.
Social uncertainty. That sounds like a way bigger hurdle than any lab challenge.
It really can be. And that's precisely why the BTrust Project exists. It's funded by the EU, Horizon Europe, with about 1.5 million euros aimed squarely at this legitimacy gap.
So their goal isn't just to sell the science harder.
No, quite the opposite. Their objective is to figure out a transparent, inclusive way to govern these things based on co-creation.
Co-creation, meaning getting everyone involved.
Yes, exactly. Bringing citizens, researchers, industry, regulators, everyone to the table to shape how the technology gets used.
Makes sense.
And it lines up perfectly with big EU goals, like the European Green Deal and the bioeconomy strategy. Both demand sustainability and public buy-in.
Okay, let's unpack the promise part first. Because of the upsides, they sound pretty dramatic. We heard insights from Odd-Gunnar Wickmark and Nils Elmegard. They see NGTs as real game changers.
Oh, absolutely. They represent a huge leap in efficiency. We're talking about ways to improve crops that are much, much faster and far more precise than, traditional breeding ever allowed.
And the benefits could be things like?
Well, huge potential applications. Developing crops better suited to climate change, think drought resistance, for example, improving pest resistance naturally, which could mean significantly reducing environmental impacts, like needing fewer chemical pesticides.
Yeah, Nils Elmegard from the Danish Seed Association made a point I thought was really interesting. He framed NGTs not as some radical break, but more like a continuation.
Yes, a more precise, efficient continuation of traditional plant improvement. That's his view.
Getting to outcomes that might take decades with older methods, but doing it cleanly, more predictably.
Exactly, and that framing is really key, because if you accept that premise that it's a refined tool for traditional goals, then the big question becomes, why treat them under the really strict rules designed for older GMOs?
Ah, okay. That's the friction point you mentioned earlier. It's not technical, it's regulatory and societal.
Precisely.
But hang on. If the end product, the plant, is chemically or genetically identical to one bred conventionally, why the need for all this special governance? Isn't it just red tape slowing down vital climate solutions?
Well, that's the heart of the tension, isn't it? Because currently they often fall under those older, more restrictive rules. European innovation is definitely lagging. Countries in North and South America, for instance, they've adopted more, let's say, proportional approaches.
So Europe is falling behind because of its own rules.
In some ways, yes. Now, the European Commission is proposing a new legal framework, trying to differentiate between types of NGT products. That's a start, a necessary one.
But I sense a but coming.
But, as the sources we looked at really stressed, just changing the regulations won't magically fix the trust issue. It's not enough on its own.
So the regulatory fix helps, but it doesn't build that long-term social buy-in.
Exactly. You need more. If the rules change, or even if they can't technically distinguish the products, then the burden shifts almost entirely onto transparency and traceability.
Which brings us to the Darwin Project, right? Coordinated by Odd-Gunnar Wickmark.
Yes. Darwin is all about traceability. How do you track these things?
Why is that so critical if they're sometimes indistinguishable?
Well, Darwin is working on developing new ways to detect NGT-derived products. And here's the really fascinating bit, especially if you're into the technical side. They're aiming to identify these products even when there's no foreign DNA left behind.
Wow. Okay, how do you even do that?
Mm.
If there's no typical genetic marker, what are you looking for? Molecular forensics?
It's incredibly challenging, but it's fundamental for governance. NGTs, especially the ones making tiny, precise edits, can mimic natural mutations perfectly. No foreign fingerprint. But for people to have an informed debate, for trust to be maintained, for consumer choice, especially around labeling, you need to know the origin. If scientists, regulators, even citizen groups can't detect or monitor what's actually in the food supply, well, trust disappears fast.
That link between detection and choice is powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift to the consumers themselves. Laura Crum shared findings from a Darwin survey in Germany and Spain. What did they find out about what people know or think they know?
Well, the first big finding was, maybe not surprising, awareness is generally low. Most people
Yeah.
didn't really distinguish between NGTs and the older
They
GMOs.
just lump them all together.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Which means the default reaction is often cautious, maybe skeptical, based on those older debates.
So we're fighting yesterday's battles with tomorrow's tech.
Okay.
But there was a second finding, something more positive.
Yes, absolutely. Factual information does help. Openness increased, especially when the benefits were clearly explained, and particularly when those benefits were linked to public goods.
Like sustainability.
Exactly. Things like reducing pesticide use or improving climate resilience. That resonated. It confirms that for many people, it's not just about the process, how the plant was made, but about the purpose. Why was it made? Who benefits? Society. Or just the company.
And who delivers the message is crucial too, right? Finding 3.
Hugely important. People tend to trust scientists and public authorities much more than industry sources.
So the burden of communication falls more on public institutions.
It seems so. It puts the onus on those seen as working for the public good. And it all loops back to that idea of choice.
Even if the product is identical.
Yes. Even if it's genetically indistinguishable from a conventionally bred one, people really value transparency. They want clear labels. They want to make an informed choice.
So acceptance isn't static. It depends on how the whole thing is governed and communicated.
Precisely. It's dynamic. It depends less on the final carrot or corn and more on the process, the governance, the communication.
Okay, so the challenge shifts. It's less a science puzzle, more a people puzzle, a societal one.
Right.
Which brings us back to trust and co-creation.
Exactly. Viral Rickhart and Charlotte Boone from Alice Down the Rabbit Hole, they talked about this. And for them, co-creation isn't just, holding an info session or running a PR campaign.
It's deeper than that.
Much deeper. They ran these workshops with consumers and farmers, and the conversations apparently moved past the technical stuff incredibly quickly.
People didn't want a science lecture.
Not really. They jumped straight to higher-level questions, values-based questions about purpose, yes, but also ownership, fairness.
And that's where you get the emotional language, the metaphors, like describing gene editing as cutting nature.
Right, that's the reality you have to engage with, even if the science is different. That emotional connection is powerful.
And what about the farmers? They had specific concerns.
Yes, the farmer perspective highlighted this issue of agency. It wasn't always outright rejection of the tech, it was more a worry about being pushed into adopting things.
Without having a say.
Exactly, without proper dialogue, without feeling like they have any real agency or control in the transition, losing control over their own practices.
So this co-creation idea,
Mm-hmm.
it involves listening to resistance, sharing power. What does sharing power actually mean in practice for developing NGTs? How do you do that without just grinding everything to a halt?
Well, co-creation, as they define it, means genuinely listening to that resistance, those concerns, and actually integrating them. Adapting the technology's application based on what society values, not just what's technically possible.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Maybe farmers prioritize keeping seed varieties open source. Co-creation could mean structuring the intellectual property around new NGTCs to reflect that need, rather than just maximizing patents.
So that requires humility, openness.
Definitely. Humility and openness. Treating trust not as a quick marketing win, but as a long-term relationship, something you build, something that goes both ways.
This really does sound like a fundamental shift. Susanne Baden Jørgensen sort of summed it up, didn't she?
She did. The core lesson is that trust in these powerful new technologies like NGTs, it has to be earned. Through transparency, real dialogue, shared responsibility.
It doesn't just happen because the science is explained well.
No. That one-way, top-down flow, here's the science, now accept it. That just doesn't work for building genuine trust.
So the big takeaway for anyone working in emerging tech, biotech, AI, whatever, is this need to move away from that old model.
Absolutely. Shift from we innovate, you accept to something much more collaborative, reflective, integrating societal values right from the very beginning.
Because if we actually want the benefits, the climate resilience, the reduced pesticides, we have to accept that the process needs to be more democratic, built on shared values.
That seems to be the argument. The technology is just a tool. Its success, its acceptance depends hugely on the quality of the governance around it.
It really hammers home that final point from the project, doesn't it? Innovation needs to be co-created with people, not just for them.
Precisely. Trust doesn't just follow innovation automatically. Trust enables innovation. That's the key insight.
A challenging thought, and maybe a provocative one, for every researcher, innovator, and policymaker listening. That the science is only half the equation, trust is the other, arguably harder, half.
It certainly makes you think differently about rolling out new technologies.
Indeed. If you listening want to learn more about the BeTrust project, their co-creation methods, or access the resources from the Masterclass we discussed, you should visit the BeTrust forum online.
Yeah, it's a great resource, especially for policymakers, researchers, people in the biotech industry. Definitely worth engaging with their work.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.